Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Soul and Spirit Podcast. Welcome back to this sacred interweb space where we explore the mysteries of our existence and the unseen threads that connect all of us. I'm your host, Reverend Lexi Hovis, and I invite you to settle in today and not just listen to the words, but really feel and integrate what we're talking about. This podcast is very much a journey into the essence of who each of us is beyond our titles, beyond our jobs, beyond the roles we have in our mundane lives, and beyond all of the noise that life brings. And today, it's a journey into what the ancient mystics, poets, philosophers, and everyday seekers have tried to name. In today's episode, I want to explore the simple question, what is a soul? Across time, cultures, spiritual traditions, the soul has been called many different things. Some of my favorites are the inner light, the true self, and the divine spark. But beyond words and teachings, what does it feel like to live connected to that inner essence that each of us has? Today, I would like to look at how different wisdom traditions really speak of the soul, and then reflect on how that soul that each of us has shows up in our own lives. I'd also like to remind each and every one of you that everything I explain or talk about is from my own research and my own experience and my own thoughts. So if anything doesn't resonate with you, that is completely fine. Do not worry about it. Take what you need and then leave the rest. When we speak of the soul, we're speaking about something that is deeply intimate and yet really a universal concept. Some traditions tell us that the soul is part of us that remembers who we truly are. Others say it's a piece of that divineness that lives within every single being on this planet. The soul is often described as your eternal, unique essence that learns and experiences things across multiple different lifetimes. In ancient Greece, philosophers like Plato used the word psyche, which means breath or life force. To them, the soul was what animated the body. It actually gave it life. But it's also part of us that seeks truth and goodness beyond this material world that we live in. Instead of viewing the soul as a single entity, the ancient Egyptians believed that people were composed of multiple different spiritual bodies, each with its own divine purpose, and each one of those kind of blended together seamlessly, which I plan to get into in a completely separate episode because it is so vast and interesting. But each one of those bodies would kind of interweave together to create what we would consider the soul. Hinduism calls the internal self Atman, which after moving through a continuous cycle of birth and then death and then rebirth and birth and death and rebirth all over again and all over again and all over again, eventually the soul, the eternal self, the Atman, will reach a state of liberation that will reunite it with the universal soul, the Brahman, which is their source in Hinduism for all of existence. Different indigenous traditions often speak of the soul as not one individual essence, but as something relational, a soul that is in, constant communion and conversation with the land, our ancestors, and the seen and unseen world around us. Everything that lived and those who came before, everything was all connected. Traditional Christian traditions believe that the soul is the immortal part of a person that God created. Sometimes it's described as the breath of life, and it's the part of us that would go to heaven to be with God after we die. It is also considered the part of a person that has, the emotions, the will, and the intellect to be a human being. And I really wanted to take a short look at it today because it's something that's so important to me that I even put it in my business name, Soul and Spirit. I often like to think of how I'm in the business of souls, but not in the creepy way like I'm trying to collect them or you would hear on a scary movie or on Scooby-Doo Spooky Island, but in more of the way that I feel like I am here at this time on this planet to help nurture souls in some way, help people to really connect to that innermost part of themselves, and to see that each of us is connected through that soul, and how we are all spiritual beings having this its existence and experience all together at the same time in this life. When I first started selling my crafts about 15 years ago, just crocheting, I called it Soul Creations because I truly felt that the way I could spread joy and love to the world was to put a little bit of my energy into each and every creation I made for someone. Every single piece. I tried to put a little bit of my heart and soul into that so I could give it to them. And when I contemplate on the topic of the soul, for me, it's the very core of a being, the absolute core of what makes somebody exist. I'm someone who very much believes in reincarnation. And if you think of reincarnation and all of those lifetimes that we potentially have, to me, it's the soul that dives back into those lifetimes and gives the person life. If you've ever heard of the Akashic Records, which is like this gigantic etheric library of universal knowledge that is, all of everything that has and will be, everything that's occurred or will occur. That's a very condensed version of how to explain it, but that's kind of the gist of it. This giant etheric library of everything that ever was or will be. It's talked a lot about in belief systems like Hinduism and Theosophy, but it can be accessed by anyone who can, tune into it. And if we think about the Akashic Records, though, I think that every soul has their own bookshelf on that space in that library. Now, it could be 10 or 20 feet tall, that bookshelf, and there are thousands upon thousands of rows and stacks of bookshelves in this place, but I think one for every soul. I think that each of us has a bookshelf, and each of those bookshelves has our kind of soul energy into it, so, we know it's ours. And then every book on that shelf would be a different lifetime that we have experienced. Now, there's major controversy on where the soul could potentially be located in our physical body. And it's not something I don't think we can ever figure out scientifically, obviously. Your best guess is as good as mine. But in some traditions, they have it placed in the head area, sometimes the crown at the top of the head, the chakra. Other times it's that third eye chakra right in the center of your forehead. Sometimes it's said to be underneath the nose or nasal cavity. And sometimes it's right in the center of our heart. And then maybe there's other beliefs out there that it takes up the entire body with no real physical spot to kind of anchor it into our human existence. I tend to think of it this way. I think about it almost like an aura around me. An aura that is anchored in each of my chakras, but is still very kind of fluid and a part of me. So it's connected to me, but separate at the same time. It's just kind of another layer of energy, my energetic body that is within and surrounding me. It's like the outer part would be seen radiating off of me. So some people call this connection between our physical body and our soul the silver cord. And when that is severed, that's when we see the change called death happen. If you've ever been with someone who has passed on, at the time they've passed on, you can literally see the light leave their body. Or at least I could. I could see the light leaving my grandmother's body when we were all standing around her in the hospital when she passed away. And there's just this sense that, that person is no longer there. And then the machines continued to beat for just a few more moments, but I instantly knew when her soul had kind of left because of that, because I could see that. And the silver cord, you can kind of think of it as like an energetic umbilical cord of sorts, connecting our bodies to the divine source through our souls. So it would be connected to, the source of all that is, and it would be anchored into each of our bodies as well, connecting us. And it's a very interesting concept to try to think about. I remember learning about it for the very first time at 19 years old, trying to grasp hold of it when I took a class on the Bardo journey from Reverend Patricia Kennedy. And it was so interesting. It's this Tibetan Buddhist concept of what happens between death and rebirth. Almost like that waiting room area for souls to be reborn. They have a whole journey about that time and what happens there. If you get a chance, I would highly encourage you to look into it. but how do we connect to this part of ourselves? How do we connect to this true essence that is what we are? I think that's going to be difficult. I think that's going to be different for every single person out there. I think that it's the things that we do that make us feel most like ourselves and most connected inward. I think that those are usually things that we do when we are, by ourselves and possibly sitting in silence. Usually, things I would recommend would be journaling, writing down your thoughts or dreams, seeing what's trying to connect to you. The same with meditation or practicing, silence or our breath. We each have a higher self as well, which is kind of a whole other thing, which remember from this is my point of view, but our higher self would be related to our soul, but it's more like the divine, purest aspects of our soul. It's that inner compass that steers us towards our highest and best so we can be in balance. To me, they are very much connected and very intertwined, but the soul is like that detachable piece that would jump into each life and we experience and learn and grow so that we can reach that state of perfection. To me, our higher selves is where our kind of gut instinct comes from. The more we listen to that gut instinct, the more we can start to recognize that it's there, and the more that we can tune in and connect even more with our soul. You may have also heard the concept of a family or a soul pod, sometimes people say, which is an interesting thing that says each of us has a group of other souls that we can deeply resonate or share kind of a similar frequency with. And those other souls continue to reunite with us over and over again across multiple lifetimes in reincarnation. They would constantly shift different roles in each lifetime, friends, family, romantic partners, or even people we might consider enemies. My mom in this lifetime was definitely my sister in a past life. I already know that for sure. There may have been a lifetime where the roles were reversed and I was her mom. Things like that with all kinds of people. But the purpose of these kind of soul families was to support each other's souls in the growth that we are each trying to achieve to reach that kind of state of perfection. We're each here to help each other learn and grow with the lessons that we're here supposed to be figuring out and going through this experience together. These people or other souls are often the ones that you have felt an instant connection with. Just after a little bit of time, they feel like family or they feel like you have known them like your entire life. That's kind of the people we're talking about. I often think of these people as soulmates because I do think we have multiple of those. I don't think it's just one person out there that's our soulmate, and I don't think they have to be romantic partners. I have people in my lifetime, this lifetime, that I have no romantic connection to whatsoever, but I know they are soulmates, that they would be part of my little soul family. We could also talk about twin flames here, which is a spiritual concept that the soul could be essentially divided into two and put into different bodies. So the other person would be like you, just in another form. And the more I learn about it, I'm not quite sure where it would fit into my set of truths because I believe that each of us holds our own individual soul. We're still a part of the divine, so essentially we are all connected and all parts of each other, but I'm not sure how I feel about thinking of my soul being split into two and like shoved into different bodies. I could almost see it with like twins being born at the same time and having that connection that a lot of times twins have, where if one is in pain, the other one is in pain. I could see almost them being twin flames, but the way it's described now is almost like a twin flame is your person exactly like having exact same experiences as you, but like mirroring your life. And as much as I had a instant connection with my husband when I met him. I mean, the first time I saw him and we were walking by each other, I just looked up at him and I knew him. I knew I had never met him before, but I looked at him and I was like, "Oh my God, I know him. How do I know him?" And I asked people around us, like, where was he from? Like, maybe maybe I had met him in this lifetime. Maybe we had crossed paths somehow, but I also, looking at him, I was like, no, I know I don't. I know I've never physically seen him before, but I just had this instant knowing that I know who he was and I knew he was important to me. Within one day of us spending time together at Camp Chesterfield, I had people asking me how long we had been together and if we were married. And I just had like met him like that day, that weekend. And so he has often been described to me by other people as possibly being my twin flame. And I definitely think there's something there. I don't know if it's I don't know enough about twin flames to say absolutely he's my twin flame, but we both had this instant connection that I knew we were going to be together. I could see our paths very clearly laid out on how important he was going to be to me. And I've never felt that extreme about another person in my entire life. So yeah, he could be my twin flame, I guess. But when you kind of look into the concept, it says that a lot of times there's kind of this big thing where one person tries to run away because they see themselves in this other person. And, I never felt like that. I mean, from the moment I knew him, we were connected and we were never apart after that. And now it's been, gosh, 8 years, maybe 9. It's been several years now. And I mean, we're still just as connected as we were. That's never really waned at all. And so I think of him as definitely one of my soulmates because it was just instant. And I've had that with other people that I have met that they felt like my best friend or a sister. Like there was such a connection there too that, when I'm away from them, I miss them so much, but the connection is immediately there as soon as we get back together. And so I think there's maybe multiple levels to soulmates or the people in our soul families that maybe there's just some that we just gravitate. Our frequency is just slightly closer to each other to where we connect with those people even more than we may connect to other people that feel like soul family as well. I don't know. It's a lot to consider, and I think it's probably different from every single person. I only know what I have experienced. But overall, the soul is such a complicated concept. This is just a small little snippet about it and my thoughts on it because it is such a huge thing that I think about constantly in my daily life. But it's also really simple at the same time if you believe in it. If you're a believer that each of us has a soul and that we can, connect into it, and the way we can connect into other people because we are also connecting into their soul. And, some traditions put the soul and spirit together as the same thing, almost using the words as interchangeably. And to me, they are very different. They're interconnected, absolutely. They are woven in and out of each other, but they are also separate pieces of us, I think. So come back next week and we will discuss what I think of spirit. I'll see you soon.